welcome to the first ever Dharma Office Hours. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm very excited. Who would like to raise a first topic or question, talk about their past or practice or something? Who among you is brave enough?
I'll be brave, Dor. Right before you joined us, we were discussing how we can make our practice more embodied.
Mm-hmm. So in the path that I'm crafting right now, I'm peppering all sorts of embodiment practices through the jhanas. Normally they're ignored, and then people tend to meditate from here on up. But especially as the mind becomes more collected, it becomes easier and easier to bring more of you online. And I'm particularly partial to realization process practices. You know about that, Christine? Yeah. I
do.
Yeah. So in some sense, especially as one goes deeper down the jhanas, if you don't take the whole of the body with you, if it's not all humming along, the effect of the meditation on the mind is reduced. So something that Culadasa spoke a lot about in T.H.I, but having all of the subminds participating in the meditation so that any insight reverberates and affects all of them together. And so if you tell me about your practice, I can tell you how you might benefit from integrating that, or if you want to ask a more specific question, you can drill down.
I think we should bring in Rasma and Elliot on this because they were the ones talking about it. I actually do the realization process sometimes, so that's how I do it, but I'm not sure everybody here is familiar with it.
Mm-hmm. I'm not familiar with it. And yeah, I'm always interested in how to bring more of a meditative presence to being in my body. And also my particular question was about how can we be in a sort of meditative state relationally. I'm opening up into being in different types of relating with people. And I'm curious about where the intersection of being in a meditative state and relating to others would come in.
Mm-hmm. So generally, the way that I would frame this is not being in a meditative state while relating, but more so embodying yourself as close as possible to what in realization process they would call fundamental awareness, fundamental consciousness, or others might call the ground of being. Tibetans would say Rikpa, and if you say Nibbana to a Theravada, they'll be very upset, so don't do that. But generally speaking, very roughly, I would say, the more the vibrations you feel in every part of your body are fast and fine, the closer you are to experiencing yourself without mediation, right? Without layers of mind and conception mediating the experience. And so as you relate to a person, you both are receiving them much more directly. There's less or fewer layers of separation. And the way that you're engaging with them is much more fresh, authentic, immediate, without agenda that might be subconscious and then manipulating yourself, your own view, and the other person. So for a taste of that, actually, maybe we can do a quick RP type meditation. So let's sit in a comfortable, upright position. I think you're all sitting on chairs, so it also helps to have feet on the floor. The way that RP, realization process, frames this is also inhabiting the fullness of the body. Meaning, this isn't about directing attention from here to the body. Here, I'm looking at my knee, I'm looking at my pelvis, I'm looking at my ear. It's sort of like relaxing into the body, relaxing backwards and melting into ourselves. So simply with the intention of breathing into every part of the body, every cell, every piece of tissue, you might start feeling every piece of us coming a little bit more online. Doesn't matter what the flavor of the sensation is, it's more important that it feels like we're in body, in the fullness of it, three-dimensionally. If there's a place where you're not sure that you're inhabiting, it is okay to direct attention to, sort of tickle it and bring it up online. And see if you can release attention back and continue being in touch with that part through awareness, not needing to move attention to sense it. The most important thing to inhabit this way are the bones, deep, deep within the tissue. So you can see if, for example, we isolate just the bottom of our feet. It can be the contact with the ground, sensations of the skin. See if we can penetrate even deeper. And again, this might require some attention at the beginning, just to entrain that part of the body to come to awareness. This way we're breaking down the idea of a foot or bone, the body altogether, and just go directly into those very fast, very fine sensations. As deep a contact as possible with those bones in the foot. And from there, it's very natural to climb up the shins. You even feel a sort of flow happening from the bones in the foot, climbing up. And then an incredibly useful exercise here is to try and feel the sensations from both legs. Try to isolate just the shins now, as if they're happening on the same ground, as if they're communicating, as if they're in direct contact with one another. You can try and find a resonance between the sensations on the left and right legs. Won't necessarily be very pronounced right away. You ask yourself a question and you're feeling resonance, you might even just get a slight maybe. But as you stay with them and simply applying intention this way, inviting the two sides to come into harmony. Yeah. More and more, it's like the tissue sees itself directly. Two sides see themselves directly. Now, in an RP practice like this, we would then go over every tissue in the body. I don't want to do it right now. It can take a while. Just scan up all the way, going through the knees and thighs and pelvis and so on. And this is incredibly useful throughout the entire path. because every holding pattern that we have in the body and mind necessarily manifests as a type of schism in the body that prevents sensations from synchronizing and harmonizing this way. And even now, if you're still tuning into your body, if you see a place that might be a little more dark or resonating, feeling a little warped or twisted, it's a sign of type of separation, or sort of like a DMZ between two or more parts of the body. And a lot of this path towards awakening necessitates releasing these types of schisms. And without being fully embodied this way, allowing the purest or sensations coming from the deepest ground to express themselves on the same ground, it's impossible for the mind to be collected enough to maintain the higher basis of operation that really allow us to take this type of being, this type of living off the cushion and into day-to-day life. So let's end the meditation here and tell me how that was for you. I'm going to try to balance the experiential and the direct with the conceptual understanding. But if any of you are interested in more conceptual, intellectual understanding, or otherwise don't care for that as much, feel free to tell me where on the spectrum you want me to go.
And one thing I struggled to balance, it came up here with the embodiment practice, is sort of all of the different dimensions of spiritual practice. Like, for example, at some points in time, we focus heavily on embodiment, and then I think I'm done with this. And then, but there's some kind of progressive deepening, or like you mentioned, it needs to be at every point in the path at all points in time. Which is kind of part of a broader question about how to really construct a system, either for yourself or in dialogue with teachers of spiritual practice, and really hit the blind spots and make consistent progress.
Mm-hmm. So you're asking how to embed this into progress of practice. So you're advancing. So okay. Let's just see if anyone has any comment or question about the meditation itself before we adjust that.
I felt compelled to, pretty much when you were saying, D.O.H, that you're going to end meditation, I felt compelled to go and investigate the schisms and separations that exist in certain parts of my spine, say, that don't want to fully be together whole. And it was interesting. It seemed like there was quite a lot to do there and bring presence to. Yeah. So thank you for opening that up more broadly across the body, even though we didn't go through the entire body.
So to answer your question, is it Kush? How do you pronounce your name? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know so much if I can answer this meaningfully in voice right now versus but in my book is out with the relevant practices. But I would say, if you're familiar with the path of jhana or the elephant path in T.H.I or Mudra systems, collectedness necessarily brings us into a foundation of being, or a basis of operation, where the different participants need to be less mediated, initially by concepts, but later on even by more subtle sensations. And with each level of deconstruction, going deeper into shamatha practice, right? Staying, relaxing practice, you also then have the capacity to embody yourself on a deeper or more foundational level. And it's very apparent when you do that, especially when you get to the ground floor, so to speak. At that point, you can even embody yourself from a level before the schisms. And that's what fully allows then the rough core schisms to start melting into the space layer consciousness. And so the best answer I could give is just it feels better. The body becomes more harmonious. There are more sensations of bliss, contentment, equanimity. Even though those are not reliable, they do serve as like landmarks on the path. Ultimately, it becomes unmistakable. Like you really, without effort, without needing to direct attention, without needing to call things up into awareness, the foundational state of being is more embodied. You're just more and more in touch with more and more of yourself, and in a deeper way, right? It moves from like the tingling skin on the surface and like deep into the bones and blood vessels. And at some points, at the depth of it, it might even feel like every cell in your body is online in some way, like collaborating, communicating, even participating in consciousness. I like saying that in some sense, every tissue in the body is a participant in computation, right? We have this sense that it's just the brain or maybe just the nervous system if you're generous about it. But the fewer, like the less holding patterns you have, the less things need to be mediated, the less, say, load-bearing ideas you have about yourself and the world, the less the body, even the roughest parts of it, like the bones, need to continually be used as structure for the body. And then whenever they're at rest, they can become computation. And that computation is directly correlated with the more fine sensations. Like the more online as computation a tissue in the body is, the more it's felt as alive.
When you say computation, would there be a parallel to essentially like having access to the subconscious as it communicates through the body, or can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
That's exactly right. In some sense, or I would start by saying the Tibetans like calling highly realized beings omniscient, as in all-knowing. But of course, it's not necessarily they know everything about everything. They don't possess the entirety of the information of the universe. It's more so that they have direct and immediate knowledge of all of their being. In some sense, you could say that for Buddhists, the notion of an unconscious isn't there all the way, or at least it's very different than in the Western way that we think about this. And it's because a lot of this path towards abiding in, recently I like saying pure consciousness, right, for ground of being or nirvana and so on. The path towards that involves spinning down the layers of concepts and identities and strategies and stuck emotions and so on, that because it's so big, you can only see the tip of the iceberg. When you relax all of this and get to a point where things more and more rise naturally, freshly in the moment to be of service, right? To be a reflection of the world around you. And there's not so much subconscious that participates anymore. Everything is seen, or if not, at least is accessible, right? So you might have, you might be meeting a person and you're more so engaging normally with them, and you have a slight sense of some memory, some emotion, and it's possible to go into it and make that more pronounced in the experience. But it's far less likely that you would have some grievance, something important that needs to be said that is buried so deep that you're not aware of it at all, right? That it's deeply in the subconscious while affecting the conscious in ways that you're not aware of.
I have a little bit of a follow-up question, which is having to do with bandwidth processing. So I have found there are times that I go into states where I have a lot of access to my subconscious, but my limiting factor is often kind of overwhelm at the amount of sensation. And I'm wondering if you have any practices that might address that, or any information about that.
Mm-hmm. And so this is something that you don't necessarily have the capacity to do once you're overwhelmed, especially if you're with people. But then if there's overwhelm, there's necessarily something that is being overwhelmed. Meaning there's some mental structure that is trying to handle the flow of incoming information, but it's too much for its specific capacity. And normally what you would find is under that structure, there is some belief or some feeling that isn't being felt that the overwhelmed structure is trying to protect or trying to enact in the world, right? That the belief, the intention. So there, what would be useful is to really just ask what is being overwhelmed. And then you can feel specifically in the body the place that's really tense. If there's a very clearly defined locus of it, or maybe a network of places. And then going further down, the inquiry can be, what's this sensation? What's the fear? What's being protected? What's the belief? This is where inquiry comes in. And the more space you have for the exploration, meaning the deeper the meditation, the more you have the support from a friend or a therapist, more space for the full uncovering of this is available. Yeah. In the moment, if you are speaking with someone who's someone you trust, or someone who would have the space for you, you can just out it, right? You can say, hey, slow down a second, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And maybe even, would you be willing to explore this with me? Or just wait for a while I feel my feelings. Yeah. Right. Often those feelings of overwhelm that we're all carrying also are associated with some type of identity that we're not aware we're holding, like an identity around, I need to be a certain way, things need to be a certain way. And so it's so much the water we swim in, we don't consider that we can out it, right? And then play and dance with it versus bear it while we're doing the thing we're supposed to be doing. So the more you bring it to awareness and even into personal awareness, the easier it is to dance with. Yeah. It also answers a question that Kosh sent me by email about how to do shadow and generally psychological work in the world versus just in meditation or in therapy. I like the way that the Tibetans talk about this. At the beginning, there's the standard taking refuge in the triple gem. You guys know this? Take refuge in the Buddha, in the Sangha, in the Dharma. Right? You sort of shelter yourself a little bit, and you develop the mind and the body to a level which then lets you start interfacing with all of reality, all of samsara as your practice. And so at some point, and we can talk about this later, exactly what point, they would say, now you're taking refuge in samsara. In some sense, the entirety of your life becomes a path of awakening, path of development. And so in the same way, if, for example, you have a shadow, of course, give me a shadow, not necessarily one you have.
Taking and holding and embodying power.
Yeah. So normally a person feels that they're more weak, don't have agency, or have a hard time really being there and influencing people, situations around them. And so similarly, in any situation where you think you can play with it, and it can be with friends where you tell them, this is what I'm playing with now, this is how it looks like, this is how I want even to be received, right? And preferably without telling them, clap to everything I'm doing, right? It's mostly like, give me some space to play and don't be offended if I fuck up, right? Because it's new. Alternatively, you can even go to a place where no one knows you and dress up like whoever your hero is in terms of power that you've seen in a movie or some friend or family member, right? And just like in a very shamanic sense, take on the persona, right? Walk in, give yourself a name, right? And show up like, Wonder Woman pose and just walk around and be this way, even as a caricature of it, right? Because in a situation like that, there's nothing to lose. And so it's really about being creative in terms of how you, whatever development you're looking for, whatever experiment you want to do, how to apply it in more and more situations. Of course, it also requires a deep willingness to fail and to feel the pain of what you might think is lack of success. And it pays to have an attitude of, well, I've never played with this particular shadow, I've never played with this quality. And the first step towards being good at something is kind of sucking at it. Right? And then you're like, oh, no, you're kind of bad. And it's okay. I'm like, oh, that was average. Right? Slowly climb. Be gentle with yourself as you play with it. Does that answer your question? Was there anything else you want to talk about in this context?
That was great. Thank you.
One question for me recently has been broadly trying to synthesize and really understand this kind of confusion that I have around the interplay of the Theravada tradition and the more non-dual Dzogchen, Mahayana, Vajrayana traditions. Particularly, there seems to be a lot of value in the Theravadan sila, morality, virtue trainings, especially when viewed from maybe an embodiment of a Bodhisattva ideal or a more non-dual situation. But there's still this confusion around, is the criticism of Vajrayana, of Theravada, is that an accurate criticism, or is it a strawman criticism? That Theravada only orients towards a lower level of realization of local non-self and doesn't actually orient towards the highest realization, which in some ways I find difficult to accept, because the Buddha was, if we accept the Buddha as some kind of very realized figure, seems to have been preaching this approach.
So in my experience, specifically for this, I'll start and say that in my experience, for the most part, people who practice Suttavada, Theravada, Hinaya are not going to be the type of caricature that Vajrayana makes of it. But some people, and I've recently met a few, I was really surprised by this, interpret the suttas in such a way where the criticism is exactly right. They're aiming at cutting out the basic confusion of mind, right? The basic mistaken move of confusing mind with reality, and then mind warring with mind, leading to all the tension. And once done, at least as an aspiration, the idea is I'm done with this life, because life is suffering. There's a very clear interpretation of not just attachment being suffering, but this whole world being suffering and pain. All of the senses are on fire. The aggregates are on fire. Everything is horrible. And our task is just to get the hell out, like finish the job for myself. And then when I die, I join Parinibbana and I don't reincarnate again and I don't have to suffer anymore. So that's true. Some people do consider that. If someone does finish the path, I have in the Theravadan path, I have a very hard time believing that they'll be stuck with this view. However, if you are stuck with this view, it's very unlikely you'll finish even the Theravadan path. So there's something very, in my mind, useful about knowing this criticism. Even if your path is Theravada and Suttavada, that there's more than just the solitary realization, so to speak. There's more than just cutting out this basic confusion, basic ignorance. And the place where Mahayana and Vajrayana come in is, aside from the let's say philosophical claims of what Westerners now call open individualism. Do you know what I mean when I say that? There are also practices that are more meant towards perceiving and living that life in that world directly. There's a way that the Theravada practices meant at keeping you in great degree of emptiness, nibbana, allow you to see a non-separation through emptiness, meaning this is empty, the other entity is empty, so of course there's no separation. So this is a level of non-separation that is lesser in some sense than what the Vajrayana offers. Sometimes I call it empty non-separation, because experience is empty of all things, including separation, including a me and you. In later traditions, there's a full non-separation, meaning generally I still am abiding in emptiness, and that is the anchor, that is the foundation of experience. But even as my personality and generally my model of being comes up to play, for example, when I'm relating with someone, the model encompasses both me and you as arising in the same field, in the same. I had a chat with Elliot about this a while ago, and he gave this beautiful analogy. Maybe I'll leave the stage for him to speak about it. But let me just finish by saying, in that sense, an Nhat, or someone who finished the Theravada path, has the capacity to not be confused about what is constructed mind versus emptiness, but they will not have necessarily refined their model of the world, right? What is, to the degree that allows a full non-duality, like a sense of moving from a wholeness that includes a me and you, where we're participating in a dance, in a stage, in a play, and moving in a way that's coherent with all of the other players around me, leads to a great sense of harmony and even deeper inner peace and joy and play. All of the things that the Theravadans are precluding themselves from ever feeling by having very strict ideas about what the path is like.
That's a great response. Follow-up question. Do you think there's any deep inherent contradiction between the two? Can one do both at the same time?
I have the mind to let Elliot say the thing, because it's so. I really love hearing us speak about it. It makes the point so.
I don't even remember which metaphor I was.
Like the actor and the stage.
Oh, yeah. So I was talking about self as, well, first people start as self as mind or self as thought, and then they transition to self as sensation, and then there's like a expanding to self as experience, where it's like I'm an actor on stage and the stage is self, and everywhere I walk into and talk to people, they're on stage with me, and I can walk and the stage moves with me. But there's self as the journey of me walking through life, interacting with people. I'm one of the actors on the stage, but the stage is the experience. I'm not the self. The experience is the self. The flow of experience as it travels with the witnesser, being the body, to various moments. And ultimately, I want to put on a good show. I want to win. Well, like my character on stage and everyone else's character, I want them all to flourish and succeed and live wonderful lives and do awesome things. And so it's not really about this body as a thing. It's about this flow, the bubble of experience that travels around with this body wants to have the best time possible for everyone who runs into this bubble, or for that, like the stage that is that. Is that the one, door?
Yeah. But to put it succinctly, and that's the thing that stay with me. Initially, you consider this to be a viewer of a show or a stage that's happening here. You sort of walking around, like, oh, here's that. Then, as you expand beyond this, you become the whole stage. there's still a sense of course, this is the main location of feeling, and I have many more degrees of freedom happening here. But the fundamental ontological sense of this as separate from that goes away, and you become the entire field of experience, the entire stage. About your question in terms of contradiction. So it depends. If you do Theravada flavored practices, but you're not caught up by the views of it, then there's no contradiction. But that's an edge case that's very unlikely, because even if you read the suttas or you read instructions that are inspired by people who are thinking this way, the way that they're going to inflect even the tone of voice, I want to say, right? But certainly the words, the goal, the ideal, what you're supposed to experience in meditation, is going to subtly slant you more and more towards the more dead end parts of this path, let's say. And the less such influence you have from these views, the more likely you are to then break through and go beyond, right? But it becomes an obstacle. Like it's something that you want to, even if you go down that path from the beginning, I would propose, be aware that Dharma, as described in the suttas, has a slant. And even the Buddha at the time spoke about this, not by saying there's a slant, but by saying at some point, clinging, right? Sometimes we call it attachment, upadana. It generally is described as clinging to sense objects or to sense desires or to states or emotions and so on. But the Buddha was very clear that clinging is also clinging to the Dharma, clinging to his words. And you have to let go of that. That's the whole metaphor of letting go of the raft when you cross to the other side of a river. To let go of that, to all ideas, to all views, to any notion of the Buddha, some other authority, told me that my experience needs to be this way, right? In a way that then gets installed somewhere behind your eyes and then filters all of perception, all of experience. All of this has to dissolve completely for true freedom to arise. And Mahayana and certainly the Vajrayana traditions deal with this challenge and sort of paradox about there being a path and then you have to drop the path much more skillfully from the get-go. In some sense, despite the fact that the suttas were very clear about letting go of all views, including the Dhamma, and the Buddha also said at some point you move from directed meditation to undirected meditation. You stop controlling, you stop looking towards a certain goal. In the 2,500 years since, people have really tried to push that away. And in some sense, the Theravada, Suttavada path has become the most religious, most like the suttas say this, and the world is like that, and practice is like this, and this is how you transcend the 12 links of dependent origination and then suffering. And they sort of push away, but the Buddha said that you have to let go of the Dharma at some point, and let go of all views. So there's a deep attachment to life is suffering, the world is suffering, everything is bad, and a basic defining of one's life through the lens of pain. Well, otherwise, it would be in perspective with the rest of what the world and life has to offer.
How's your practice going, Dora?
It's my practice going. I just came back from a Suttavada flavored retreat about a week ago. And that's where I met some of these very hardcore conservative Hinayana practitioners. And I mostly did my own thing, but then at the end, which is essentially undirected meditation. Actually, I want to say a little more about that later. It's something that I enjoyed picking up from the retreat. But at some point, my partner, who was a little more of a good girl and did meditations based on the instructions, hit cessation of perception and feeling, which can happen around 7th and 8th jhana. Do you guys know about that system? The 4 jhanas and then the 4 arupa samapatis, sort of. So like progressive states of deconstructing the mind. What I mentioned a little bit earlier, where there's fewer and fewer coarse forms. There's not so much body or thought anymore, and sensations become very, very subtle. You then lose the notion, the basic notion of space, even time. If you inflect the mind right, you see like the most fundamental bits of mind in the 6th jhana. It's not exactly a jhana, right? The base of boundless consciousness. And then in the 7th, you get to the base of nothingness, where there's nothing besides a sensation or a perception that there's nothing. It's very, very peaceful. And from there, you can go into 8th jhana, which is neither perception nor non-perception. It's like a state of just barely knowing what's happening. You more so understand what has happened in retrospect coming out of it, especially if it's very deep 8th jhana. From there, what's possible is to get to what's called cessation of perception and feeling, meaning anything that we could call experiencing, let me say it differently. Anything that we can call qualia goes away. It sometimes might be a complete blink out, like shut down of the mind, like in anesthesia, where they put you under and you wake up 12 hours later and it's a blink, right? It's not like sleep when you're sort of aware that time has passed. It's just like completely shutting down the mind and you get out of it. Sometimes even just a microsecond after, a fraction of a second after. Other times it can be what Triodasa described as a pure consciousness experience, meaning there's still just the basic sensory perception, but there's no perception in the Buddhist sense, no sanya, no feeling, no thought, no conception, no self-reflective awareness. So the normal faculty that knows and tells itself continually, iteratively what's happening, right? Self-reflective awareness shuts down.
Yeah.
And then when the mind returns, there's a much clearer understanding of what I mentioned before, the basic mistake of the mind, of taking mind as reality. Because for a few moments, there's no more mind. The basic processes of mind are no longer working and being used as filters on top of pure consciousness. So there's a deep insight as soon as the mind starts coming back up and you start seeing the mistake happening in real time, like the mistake of treating mind as mind. And that's the main path of awakening for Theravada, Suttavada. That's the main thing the Buddha talked about in the suttas. He mentioned a few other paths, but this is a main one. And I've had these experiences before, sort of by accident. This is something that happens in deep concentration states, and I've had dozens of these practicing with Triodasa. But I was inspired by my partner, and I was like, okay, I'm going to try this too. So I actually did the instructions, start to finish in the retreat, and I had a few cessations like this for the first time. And what's particularly beautiful about getting to cessation from having climbed through the jhanas and abiding in a very deep and pronounced 7th jhana is that the insights coming from this is available to all of the mind. Because if you fall into this by accident, so to speak, just the sub-minds, the participants of mind that were online at the time might get the insight. But for this to really catch, in some sense, it's not just an insight. It's a willingness of all of the participants of mind to, in a sense, lay down their arms. And so this is the sort of change that can only happen if everyone knows everyone is opting into the change. And so it's very valuable in terms of a state where so much of you is online, so much is available to receive insight and agree on how very deep, very fundamental changes in mind can and should happen in the mind. And so very refreshing, a lot of opportunity for deep insight, clearing out a lot of karma, a lot of schisms, very refreshing. And also for me, for the first time in a while, it made me like crave some final liberation, which is something that I don't have so much in my experience, because it was like, oh, I just have to meditate a little more and everything will be done. And of course, that's a major cause of suffering, because it's an idea of a self going towards some idea of how it can be in a future, right? Like a concept above concept upon concept, and it squeezes down the whole system, prevents contact with pure consciousness. Yeah. How does that all land?
It's really nice to hear you giving such a honest reflection of even in such a realm, having grab and considering that, wow, I could get really drunk on this too, or really thirsty for this potential thing that's apparently outside. It's cool to hear, man. Appreciate your candor.
Yeah. And I'm grateful for the experience, right? Because it teased out, I want to say every last part, but I don't know that every last part, or at least many parts of me that were still spinning on that in the background, right? Gotta finish the path, gotta go towards, it's gotta be perfect, it's gotta be complete, right? Like I'm a very high achiever in my nature. So it's really poked this sort of thing out of me. And it took some time to really recognize, because it was so, that there's a way that those cessations also wipe out so much of me. Like in some sense, it felt like deep spiritual surgery, like finding places in me that were really restless, intense. But those places are the ones that are holding my body and mind together, right? That they're so integrated, so deeply in control, in like the foundation of what allows this whole thing to materialize as a human, that it needed a very profound state of relaxation and collectedness to even be seen. Meaning, for the most part, it's parts of me that are not seen at all, right? It's sort of like some sort of shadow government that's completely outside of the public eye, where no light is ever shed. There's no accountability. No one sees it. And even this shadowy governing body itself doesn't see itself, right? It has no self-reflection. It has no process of receiving any type of feedback. And so that is the beauty of that system. And a lot of what I'm trying to do now is frame this whole path of jhana and then arupa samapatis, like the whole progression of deconstruction, as something that is less attainment oriented. Like I'm a meditator and I'm doing the jhana and I'm collecting myself, and then I'm getting to Nirodha, and it'll finally destroy all the suffering, and it'll be an arhat, and there'll be like all this stuff, and frame it as a path of resting more and more deeply into oneself. Generally, the way that I'm framing the whole path is, what can I do so that every experience that I have puts me in deeper and more profound and continuous contact with myself, all of myself, which is a very different framing than the Theravada notion of exterminate the taints at the foundation of experience, uproot suffering by destroying craving. And there's a very, gotta push this away. There's something in me that's bad. I gotta find it and uproot it. Versus, how do I get into such deep contact with myself that no part of me even has the desire, right, the need to do the mental movement that is craving, that is separation, that results in ignorance and suffering. So I think there's a place for the jhana path for that. I'm still playing with it, right? Because then you can rest more and more into a collected self, into an embodied, aware online self, versus I want to shut myself down as soon as possible and get over with this horrible world and suffering.
I'm curious how that idea of like, no part of me needs to do the mental movement of craving and separation. Like, how does that interact with you, like, being in partnership with someone? How do those two things like coexist?
What do you see as the contradiction?
Just, I guess, because I don't necessarily see it as a contradiction. I'm just curious because, something like attraction probably to, your partner, or, even even the idea that they're like a separate being, which is like a little, I don't know that I want to take it into that esoteric of a direction, but, I guess I should maybe frame this with something that I struggle with, which is like, I want, other beings to have maximum sovereignty. So I sometimes get worried about how I might be influencing them through, expressing something to them, or kind of like different things like that.
First of all, I'll say, and this is very, very crucial of an understanding on this path, is that the idea of a separate self, of a separate being, goes away, doesn't mean that you're not still relating with the very clear, embodied, direct sense of there being something here that's distinct from something there. The idea of a separate being constantly attached to, right? It's not that the idea itself is bad, it's the attachment and it being installed in the unconscious is in the way of the fullest dance possible for us as more awake, embodied individual beings. Reframing of the path that the Mahayana brought was, this isn't about just eradicating suffering and so on. It's about tuning into the wholeness of being. I mentioned this a little bit before. In a way where you're an individual, you have agency, sovereignty, in the wholeness of other sovereign beings. And your deepest agency, deepest uniqueness is expressed only when you can move in coherence with all of the other beings. So letting go of an idea of a separate self, and also letting go of an idea of a non-separate self, is the path towards most fully and uniquely expressing ourselves. And that happens in the same way with one's partner, right? Imagine that instead of me having an idea of me and a partner, and that's what they'll like and what they want and what I need, and all the hustle and bustle of ideas about how things should be, I'm perceiving them very directly, and with minimal notion of them being like a lesser priority than I am in some sense, or something distinct fundamentally than me. And then it becomes much more like how I want to care for myself applied to them and to our mutual dance, than an idea of how to help them, how to best serve them, blah, blah, blah. Normally an idea, and again, an idea that I'm attached to. Of course, if I see my partner and she comes back home after a long day of work, and I'm like, oh, maybe she's hungry. Hey, are you hungry? Make you some food. Right, that's an idea, but that's great, right? But if I have an idea that to be a good partner, I have to feed my partner every time she steps into the house or comes back home after work, then I'm not seeing her in the moment. I'm seeing my idea. And the reason I'm attaching to this idea in the first place is very likely that I have some deeper belief that if I don't show up this way with my partner, then I'm a bad partner. And if I'm a bad partner, they're going to leave me. And if they leave me, I'll be lonely. So I have an idea that I have to feed my partner. Under that, there's a belief that that's the way to be a good partner. Under that, there's a fear that I'm not willing to feel that they'll leave me. None of that, there's a sense of loneliness that I don't want to feel. Right? So a lot of the path is, and again, this is the Dharma in the world, seeing those ideas. I'm attached to an idea that this is what it means to be a good partner. I'm like, oh, what makes me think this way? Right? And then sometimes just asking what makes me think this way allows the fear to be felt. And in some sense, 100% of the practice is just feeling the fear, without trying to change it, without even trying to make sense of it, just feeling the raw sensations, not even calling them fear, unpleasant, just really being with them all the way. And as those move through the system, they're expressed, they're felt, it's less and less of a need for an idea of how I am supposed to be, how I am supposed to be with my partner, right? This whole conceptual world. Swim and it just dissolves. Like, you take away the foundation, the whole building just collapses. Does that fully answer your question?
Yeah, I think that was good. I don't want to take up too much space, but I have one more kind of related question, which is
Please take up all the space.
It's about sort of like self-sacrifice and like martyrdom, essentially. And how, and you sort of answered it where it was having to do with I think there's maybe the martyrdom is too much on the side of the non-duality and everything is the same piece, or I don't know. I'm trying to grasp like how these concepts relate to like self-protection and like appropriate self-protection and like righteous anger for like if someone is not treating you well, or how self-protection and like martyrdom might relate to this.
Mm-hmm. So here we're going into a territory of particular character styles and compensation mechanisms, and using the same concepts we just discussed. One personality type might be that self-sacrifices so that they can be a good partner, so that they're not abandoned, so that they don't have to feel lonely, and so on. They don't know how to be in connection with the foundation being that they're taking care of themselves. So they let go of basic needs. They might not even be attuned to basic needs. A lot of this path, again, the way I like to frame it is becoming a master of taking care of yourself by fully understanding your needs, respecting them, and even seeing the beauty in them, not pushing them away, because the need is a constant pressure. You can't push it. You can what's the word? You can project it on someone else. You can sort of sideways massage it, but it's always there, and unless it's fully touched on, it's going to be suffering. It's going to be tension. And so, the simplest example is if when you were a kid, you only got attention when you showed up in a way that slotted into your parents' idea of what a child is, right? Or a good kid is, then you learned to abandon parts of yourself. You learned to sacrifice some of your needs, some of your ways of expression, so that you could get care, so that you could survive. So there's a wisdom in that mechanism, and it's a path of development to become fuller human, so to speak, right? Again, to come into deeper, more profound, more continuous contact with each and every part of ourselves. And just to say that the flip side of this, some people learn to take care of their needs by really pushing hard against others, right? Don't get close. I'm doing my thing, right? To close down the heart. Don't want to relate to other people. I don't want to feel your emotions, right? I don't want to be compelled by what you need. Like, I'm doing my thing. No, thank you. Right? It's like the opposite of that style.
I think maybe one final follow-up is just, I'm more thinking about it in the frame of like, Jesus said to like, if someone hits your cheek, turn the other cheek. Sort of like, how does that type of, how does that kind of fit into like, how would you respond to that, knowing what you know about all these different kind of threads?
So, we're getting into a territory of pretending there's some final right answer for something, right? It really depends on the situation. Sometimes if I'm attacked and I want to, and I think responding by turning the other cheek is going to lead to a more peaceful, connected state, and I'll do that. Another time, I think the slaps are not going to stop coming, so I'll defend myself. Right? There's no right and wrong here, and it's also very individual. And so the invitation here is to be in such deep contact with yourself and in such attunement with the person, the people around and in front of you, that the answer almost naturally springs up, whether it's turn the other cheek or step away or even defend yourself by any means necessary.
I had a question about this book. This is You Are Here by Thich Nhat Hanh.
Mm-hmm.
And in this book, he explains about not self, encouraging us to not think of ourselves as having selves.
Oh no.
Well, this is okay. Let me finish. So, and because there aren't selves, there's no birth and death. And that's great because now we don't have to worry about dying. And this is a wonderful thing.
Mm.
So I'm sure that's really not what he's trying to say, or at least if it is, I don't like it. So maybe you could say something similar that I like better.
Tell me what you don't like about it.
Well, I'm pretty sure I have a self.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure I was born. I'm pretty sure I'm going to die. So if he's trying to make me feel better, it didn't work.
Yeah. So where is yourself? Where are you looking?
I think of myself as being like the ground of being or fundamental consciousness. That's to me what myself is.
Uh-huh.
So I think it might just be a terminology thing where he says, that's not yourself. And I'm like, yes, it is. That's myself.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's all it is, I'm fine.
If that's all it is, you mean that this is a self?
If the disagreement between me and Thich Nhat Hanh is a terminological disagreement, then there's no problem. I'm fine. If he wants to use the word self in a different way, that's totally fine. He's the famous one. I am not famous. He wins.
Yeah. So I don't know the full context of what he's saying, but generally speaking, I can say very easily that any idea that you are attached to will limit your view and generally create tension, right? So even like if we examine the situation here, you have an idea, I have a self. Even as that self might not be, the thing here, you have like an identification with the entire field, with your consciousness, with whatever. Still, you're reading a book and someone says you have no self, and something is like, no, right? There's reactivity, meaning there's something in you that's constantly a little tense with the view, with an idea, the filter of perception. It's going, there's a self, 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 and it's seeing the world through, there's a self, doesn't matter, again, maybe it's here, and everything is happening to the self, everything is perceived by the self is acting, and so on. Just like any other idea that's tense, it creates suffering. If occasionally the idea, oh, I went to the supermarket and I enjoyed myself, great. Or I had such deep sleep that I forgot that I exist. Great. But if you abandon the middle path, middle way, and you lean into I have a self, I don't have a self, but also I both have a self and don't have a self, or I neither have a self nor do I not have a self. That is one of the extremes described in the Mahayana. It's the Tetralemma. And anytime you meet something like this that pokes against a view, pokes against you generally, this tension, this disagreement, this opposition, you know for sure that there's a view. This has to be this way. This is that. This should be such and such. And the way to the okay, let's stop here and then we can do a practice. Tell me what you think. Tell me how this lands.
Yeah, it's good. I like it.
So let's try this. So again, the paradigm, super simple paradigm. Every concept we're attached to has generally two types of emotions. Not necessarily. It can be a hard emotion, then a soft emotion, then pure sensation that's not being felt. So the story is, I have a self. Under that, there's anger. Someone's challenging my story. Under that, there's sadness, right? There's grief of all that I've suffered because I thought I had a self. Under that, there's just the pure sensation that the frame of view of self, not so whatever, has been suppressing and even considering as the bad sensations, right? Maybe they're unpleasant. So to do the excavation, we do this simple process. This is initially something I learned from Joe Hudson, and it's infused by this notion of the Tetralemma to do what he calls reclamation practice. I like calling it mental yoga, because just like in physical yoga, you take a mental posture and then you see which part of the mind and body do not like being in that posture. And through that, there's release of the stress. So it goes like this. You come into contact with your body, just quickly, make sure that you're in yourself. And then you say, I have no self, and that's okay. And you're not saying this because it's true or untrue. Again, you take a posture. You're just exercising your freedom. And say it out loud, and you can also be in contact with me, like you're saying it to me. Not to convince me or anything, just to really make it real.
I have no self, and that's okay.
What do you feel?
I feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how I've been thinking about it since you explained things. I think what was really upsetting me about this book was not that I disagreed so much with him, but that I felt like, well, he's such a famous person, right? He's a leader. Yeah. So he must be right about this. So I must be wrong about this. I must be wrong about this. And so now I had to figure out how can I harmonize the way I think about this with whatever lesson he's trying to teach me. He's got some lesson here that I'm not getting. And I think you described what the lesson was, except you said it from my perspective, you said it better than he did, because I didn't get it. I read this whole book and I did not get it. So I'm big on communication. Communication is really important to me. So when somebody doesn't communicate something clearly, especially somebody important like him, that zillions of people read, I get upset. So to me, it's really important that somebody explain this better. So hopefully your book will do a better job.
Yep. That's a lot of my motivation as well, having read all sorts of books like that and just going crazy with all the hand waving and incomplete descriptions and lack of context. And I have a very high degree of certainty that Thich Nhat Hanh had a much deeper realization than I do. But I was reading his book and I was like, well, okay, maybe it's for another character style, someone who's more into poetry and gentle hints versus, our type that's more, what's the sharpest, most immediate and correct and certain way to say the thing.
Yeah, he uses an analogy for he's trying to explain why it's okay that we don't have a self, and he uses the analogy of a piece of paper, and he said, when a piece of paper burns, it's not really gone. And I'm like, it is gone. No, it's actually gone. You're wrong about that. So to me, it just didn't land at all. It was like he just really blew it, which is ridiculous. Since I know, as you say, he's a great leader and he clearly had a lot to teach. It's just that for people like me, it just didn't work at all. Yep. Even though I kind of get what he's trying to come at, but it just, it didn't work. I'm sure he's a wonderful person and there's lots of great stuff in this book, but I'm sure we can explain this better somehow. I just feel like we can.
So
good. Well, we're all rooting for you.
Thank you.
I'm curious.
Yeah, tell me about your practice. Tell me about your goals. Tell me about your ideas.
I have a orientation that goes interior first, interior before exterior. Like go do the work inside, and then the exterior kind of sorts itself out. And I also have a map that the interior sort of reflects the exterior conditions that it's embedded in. Mm-hmm. And so they're not so different doing interior work and exterior work. And I have taken some general feedback in my life where people are like, yeah, maybe you should do exterior, like go lift some weights or something in the exterior, because it's not all interior. And I'm curious what your take is on the difference between the interior and the exterior and what's going on. It's a fun question.
Huh?
It's a fun question.
Yeah. I'm tempted to say the most major difference is that more information is coming from here and I have more degrees of freedom accordingly. And so it's easier to change things here than here. It's the most profound difference that I can find. And when you couple that with the understanding that everything you see is a projection filtered by the more internal, let's say, then also rather than going out to change something, first see your relationship to it, your meaning making about it, what layers of perception you're putting in front of your eyes before you're even perceiving the external. It's just a more profound path. But in that regard, I would also say going to lift weights is not something I would call external, right? Like you are taking care of your body, sure, right? But if you think your partner is stupid or weak, whatever the fuck, it's probably good to see which parts of yourself are rejecting that or are rejected for being so, versus going to a partner and telling them you're stupid and weak. Change yourself. Yeah. Any time I've learned the hard way many times. These days the softer way. Any place where I think someone else is the wrong quality, it's the bad way of being, versus I can first tune into the essence of their being and what I would even call their innate goodness. And don't place too much emphasis on goodness, but like the innate or right or even perfect nature of their being before any observation, before anything that might sound like be this way or criticism. I'm 100% rejecting, suppressing something in myself. And this is where, again, mental yoga practice comes in very handy, because I can say something like, I am stupid and I love myself. I'm stupid and I love myself. And I can see the parts of me that are resisting that, what beliefs, what feelings, what sensations come up to protest against being stupid. Yeah.
I like that phrase. It's a good phrase.
Yeah.
It's like it's got a knot in the phrase. I'm like, oh, what an interesting knot.
What do you mean?
I am stupid and I love myself. To be so bold as to call myself stupid. I'm like, oh, interesting. Where's that coming from? What's in there? This like,
it's the knot. What do you mean by that?
Do you mean N-O-T or K-N-O-T?
like K-N-O-T. I don't habitually call myself stupid, so it's a bit novel to like try it on for a moment and go like, oh, what if I say I'm stupid and I love myself? That's I'm sensing into the resistance even within the statement, that the two halves of the statement sort of fight each other a little bit in me. And that's kind of cool. A statement that can hold a bit of fight with itself.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
Right? Because maybe if you said, I'm smart and I love myself, it would be easy.
Yeah, too easy.
And the resistance. Freedom comes from allowing yourself to be everything.
Everything and anything.
Yeah.
I'm curious about whether you or anyone here has a strong impression about working with layers of stress in these most intense, kind of dense, chaotic cities. I'd love to be able to find a steady equanimity on a perpetual basis, so I don't subtly limit and change the way I live just to cope, and not go somewhere where I'm most called to go, for example, or stay somewhere I'm most called to be, like New York City, for example, because I just haven't sort of seen those layers of stress for what they are and met them fully and allowed them to kind of correct themselves. Sorry, very convoluted, but hopefully that's something to work with there.
What is the stress? What does this feel like?
It feels like when there's a thread, like the most equanimous thread, the most here thread, that it's kind of like, and I'm turning towards that thread and living from that thread. Not that there's like one decision that's better, worse, whatever, just that I'm operating in a variety of ways from that place, that it's being assailed. And then I'm off the view, off the equanimity, and I'm subtly reactive or to whatever's occurring and arising. And then then I'm more likely to be beyond subtle reactivity, and not beyond, but like instead of subtle reactivity, I'm then completely taken, spirited by a scenario, and I'm not here at all. Like I'm dissociating is probably the main marker that the level of stress physiology is not going well.
So are you familiar with mixing practice?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Have you tried that?
Yeah, that's been helpful since that time in Bangkok. I did a retreat with Geshe Sonam Gurung in Melbourne in November, and I tried throughout that retreat to make that more the emphasis even than some of the meditations would sort of suggest, just because it felt like the sweet spot of what was the most essential teaching, or one of the most essential teachings for me to practice when I was there. Yeah. So I haven't gone back to Bangkok or an even more intense place if there is one. But could be a really good
How
test.
much of a belief do you have that intense experiences are in contradiction we're staying in the view. We're in contradiction with equanimity.
I can feel like a contradiction within me. Yeah. Like there's some belief that it's not, that there's not, an equanimous way in place if in such an environment. And then I turn towards something that really impressed upon me from John Churchill.
Mm-hmm.
And also Daniel P. Brown.
Uh-huh.
And then the contradictions or the kind of conflict there seems to resolve. And particularly going into something like Dan's field, I would say. His field. Some of Dan's emanations when I knew him, when he was here. I feel, I don't feel like they're contradictory. But there is some sort of schism in me, I can see, where, there's still some belief that kind of grabs the wheel and tries to control instead of allowing the self-driving car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Get a sense that there's more of a resistance to the intensity than the intensity is taking you out, right?
Cool.
I generally don't like the word equanimity so much because we tend to use it in the context of how we want the content of our experience to be. It's your purpose in maintaining the view, in staying in Rigpa, is to let anything arise as it, including the intensity and including the reactivity. So it's more about being reactive in connection with yourself, with the person that you might be reactive to, with the environment, than to not be reactive. Ultimately, even if we do consider an end of the path where there's no longer reactivity, it only comes by allowing reactivity to arise as it is, without even calling it reactivity, right? In some sense, if reactivity arises and we call it reactivity, that is again the basic mistake of mind. Mind phenomena arises, and another piece of mind is like, this is the bad phenomena, I should not be doing. And then you get into the duality, and this is what collapses Rigpa. And so allow reactivity to arise as awareness, as the radiance of awareness, Dustin would say, and in connection with all that you are.
Good distinctions. Maybe there's something else to say here. I guess Yao, my old housemate, who's in your group now, he's continued to remind me it's all Rigpa and it's clean up of all abstractions and distortion and whatever. And those things are Rigpa anyway, no matter what, like how you stack it and how much detail or wrong view one might say it's Rigpa, actually.
Yeah. For many years, the best response that Daniel Ingram kept giving me when I was asking questions was, nothing is not it. Or some variance of the everything arises naturally, immediately, causally, blah, blah, blah. It's like, everything is it, everything is it, everything is it, nothing is not it, nothing is not. Of course, you have to already have the view to be in the right place to integrate that understanding, right? This is the whole path. Something is like, what do I do with this thing in particular, right? How do I solve this problem? Yeah.
Thank you. I actually want to ask a tiny follow-up question, which you may or may not want to take far.
Yeah.
In terms of mixing practice, is there anything that you would suggest as sort of, I mean, I could just, if you want to ask me anything, that's cool. Is there any particular stuff you would suggest in, say, if I'm in an intense environment like Bangkok or New York City or whatever, and I want to do mixing practice in a way that's not going to have me falling out of the view all the time, and maybe that's less productive, you know? Any queries or suggestions for them?
Embrace intensity. Treat it as if you're in I'll answer in a second, Christine, and give some context. Imagine that you're meeting the intensity like you're listening to your favorite music, and it's loud because you want to take it all in, and you're not even just passively taking it in, like you go out to meet it. Right? I don't know if you're a big music fan, but there's more than just like relaxing. Sometimes that's also very useful, right? But beyond the surrender, so to speak, there's also even like following every little thing, like making sure you're in touch with every aspect of it, not missing any beats, every sensation, every aspect of the experience.
I appreciate hectic electronic music, classical music, and symphonies. Going to really intense dance events sometimes here in Bali. It's like
great.
There's Gaga there.
Exactly the same way.
Sorry?
Treat it exactly the same way.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so let me provide some context by way of describing one of the main, not exactly maps, it's more of like stages of practice that I talk about, and very early in the book. I discuss what's called 4 distinct bases of operation or vantage points. This comes from Dan Brown, basis of operation, and vantage point is a Ken Wilber thing. It's your come from. What is the thing that is perceiving? What is the core filter or assumption that's placed before any experience? And in the system that I've developed, there's 4 different ones. First one is unconscious awareness. And there's conscious awareness. Then unbound awareness or unmediated awareness. And then pure consciousness. And there are sub-bases too, but those are the main ones. Unconscious awareness is awareness not aware of itself. It's when you're fully collapsed, you forget yourself. There's ignorance. That's the basic condition of being a zombie through life. You don't know what's happening, and you sometimes wake up and you're like, where was I the past few hours, right? Most people drive this way at the least, but also sometimes just go throughout all of life, just like small peaks of the next level, which is conscious awareness. So unconscious awareness is not aware of awareness. In conscious awareness, awareness is aware of awareness. So if right now, I'm sure all of you, especially as if somehow you weren't, and I'm saying be conscious of awareness, be aware of awareness, right? Like you are here now, the present moment, feeling yourself. There's an understanding and knowing of what is happening, where your attention is, right? Some context of the space. And the next level, boundless and unbounded awareness or unmediated awareness, is where we start breaking through what would normally be called individual awareness, or more constricted ideas of an individual and separate self. And when it's unbounded enough, awareness, beyond being aware of awareness, is also aware of fundamental consciousness or pure consciousness, of the consciousness that is before any conception, any mental construct, what is sometimes also called Buddha nature, or people might even call God, right? It's the ineffable, the thing that undoubtedly is, even before we have any belief about it, or statement, or perception, or awareness. So awareness not aware of itself, not aware of awareness, awareness aware of awareness, awareness aware of pure consciousness. And then last one, pure consciousness, is, when it's all the way down, is equivalent to the cessation experience that I mentioned earlier. The cessation of perception and feeling is essentially the cessation of self-reflective awareness. But there are states before the complete annihilation of awareness, so to speak, that where one is very based in that ground of being, in awareness, and then also perceptions, feelings, qualia as a whole arise just in time to provide the reflection that's needed to create the behavior that's relevant for the moment. The view that Ashley and I were talking about is related to the Mahamudra path, where you take on a series of progressive and more expanded views meant to get you to higher bases of operation. And then, especially once you're able to be in unmediated awareness, you can start taking that off the cushion. And because you're not perceiving so much through just the contracted self, it tends to even have a momentum. You don't have to work so hard. Like at the beginning, you have to like flap a little bit, like a young bird. You have to sort of recognize it and set it up again. If it's gone, then you start soaring this way. So that's what's generally meant by holding the view. There's one of many particular views. Mixing practice happens when you have an idea that in a particular situation in your life, you're more likely to lose unmediated awareness and collapse into conscious or even unconscious awareness. And that generally happens because something about the experience triggers your existing defense mechanisms, compensation patterns, identities, all the various shoulds, all the mechanisms of mind spinning in place and creating really thick filters in front of reality, even to the degree where awareness is so collapsed it doesn't even reflect itself to itself. And so mixing practice is what you do when you do have the view open, when you do have contact with pure consciousness, with Rigpa, and then you bring to mind the more difficult situation. So you sort of do a dry run on it under lab conditions. And you bring up the ideas and the images, and you start again seeing what sensations are there, what emotions, what beliefs. And so it prepares you when you go into the situation next. You're more likely, because you've hopefully released some of what was there through the mixing practice. That was a major summary of the core of the path as I see it, climbing through and into these more expanded bases of operation.
It was very clear. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And I was saying in the context of our conversation, the place where Vajrayana and Theravada diverge is there's a sense in Theravada that unless you have full, complete, ever continuous contact with pure consciousness, which is what they call being an Arhat, you're supposed to keep meditating and keep going to cessation and again generating more insight. And the only thing that they see as pure consciousness is what you encounter right at the moment of cessation or immediately after, when it's at the most pure, where the mind is not there at all. And the innovation of Vajrayana is to allow you to recognize the parts of mind that are already in contact with pure consciousness in every moment, or at least from a certain stage of practice, which is, for those of you who've already read some of my text, it's what I refer to in one of the first chapters that I call weaning us off of meditation. Right? Once you are able to maintain this contact with pure consciousness, you don't have to meditate anymore, because there's, in some sense, nowhere else to go. Any idea of needing to do more, to fix yourself, to be more enlightened, to meditate more so you can have more of a purity of perception, that is a concept and an idea of a self and a future, and that then tends to collapse the view, tends to prevent the much more natural continued release of karma in the system and not have to work so hard for it. And that's not to say that you wouldn't still practice, you would still go towards development, but it comes more directly from the primordial nature that's self-existent in all of our being. And that happens more and more the more we let go of ideas of needing to do anything about that.
I'm very interested in this. You sparked my interest in somewhere where you said, I do feel like I'm always in contact, but when I stop and meditate, I get more in contact. Or I can end up in states where I'm in contact, but I'm at a distance to myself. And so then if I go and meditate, I get closer.
How do you know it's more distant or closer?
Like I can sense a contraction. There's less of a fullness of my being in connection with the moment. Like I feel less of I get the view that there is you're never away, but also there is something that changes when I go and meditate, at least for now. Would you advise like live in the world until I find a contraction and then go meditate to reverse the contraction, or live in the world even with the contractions? Like what to do about these contractions?
So first I would say
try each. Okay.
Try what?
Try each of them.
For sure. What I wanted to say was, first I would explore your relationship to the idea of contraction. See if there's anything that is making it bad or to be changed. And that's not to say that, of course, it feels more comfortable not to have contractions, but it is something that the system does by itself. Sort of like if you place your hand on a hot oven, you don't have to say, oh, it is hot. I shall remove my hand, right? Right? But if you do have an idea that you have to place your hand on the oven so that you can finally be free of samsara, maybe you'll leave it some more. But the natural thing is just... So that's one thing. You can even go further and then see, especially if you do have an idea of contractions being bad, you can go further and see the wisdom in the contraction, right? So we spoke about this earlier, about the way that the things that we normally call, traumatic response, distortions, compensation mechanisms, they were created as the highest genius that was available to us at the time. And they may be ripe for further development, but acknowledging the wisdom and even the beauty in them is, again, a much more smoother, graceful path to their reintegration and development than trying to meditate them away or whatever technique is meant to. And I want to be clear that it's not that I am saying that there's no difference between meditation and no meditation in terms of what happens. It's more so no difference in terms of continuing to hold a view, even to the point of the view already holding itself. And then every experience you meet, especially if you're not in the way, so to speak, will get you into deeper contact with yourself. What Dustin has been hammering into my brain for a few years now is primordial wisdom knows how to do door better than you do. So the more of my ideas of myself, the more of the continuous activity of self-reflecting, refining myself into existence, the more I just let myself be the entirety of what I am, right? It's sort of like saying, be the feel, be the wholeness. The easier and even faster this process goes. And that's not to say that sometimes, I was in retreat last week, right? Sometimes I just want to meditate because it's relaxing, because I do want to create some more space for integration. And there are even practices that accelerate the path, right? That help you clear karma faster and so on. So it's not about not doing them. It's about seeing the limiting beliefs about I'm not enlightened enough. I have too much contraction. I'm too that are continually suppressing some parts of yourself. Right? If I have an idea, I'm not awake enough. I'm not again same. Okay, story, emotion, sensation. So that's a much more pleasing journey, and then really seeing the wisdom in each and every one of those layers and appreciating it, coming into it with gratitude, with reverence, even.
Mm. I mean, I had it today that before this call, I was kind of going, well, what do I feel like doing? I was like, I feel like lying around. And so I did. And it's kind of like a meditative lying around, but it definitely is different to how I was before I felt like lying around. Like something changed in that meditation.
Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't really a craving for meditation. It was just like, I would like to do that, like the positive direction towards, not the negative direction away from the world.
Mm-hmm.
So
what I notice in my practice is a lot of what I used to consider, I was thinking, am I in contact with pure consciousness? Is this awake awareness? Is this that some of the distinctions I was making were more so the quality of embodiment, or like how much of me is online and harmoniously connected in the moment, versus if truly is the foundation is pure consciousness. And the fewer such distinctions I have, this is it, this is not it, the less likely it is to actually collapse, right? If I'm defining something as not it, then I'm pushing it away, creating a duality, right? There's a self that is saying this is not the experience, and then it's looking elsewhere for the experience, and just again more tension, and it's hard to maintain the expanded view that's necessary for the continuous contact. And then it also frees the body and mind to connect, to come together and increase the beyond the quality of connectedness with pure consciousness. There is also the more standard mindfulness, right? That depends on the degree of harmony and collectedness in the mind system. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm aware of the time as well.
Right. Thanks, everyone.